So, can you beat Palworld without using any PALs? After doing a ton of research, investigation, and some limited testing, nope. Okay. Instead of taking everyone's word for it, I had to find out for myself. So I posed the question, can you beat Palworld if you remove PALs from the equation? Well, it took a long time, but I think I finally found the answer. If you end up enjoying what ended up being one of the most soul-crushing challenge runs of my entire life, make sure to like, subscribe, and consider sharing with friends. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Before we dive into the run, I think it's important to establish the ground rules for the challenge. First, the final goal for this challenge is going to be to beat all 5 faction leaders. Second, I have to beat them using only what I can carry. Guns, armor, grenades, gliders, and whatever accessories are fine, but I can't use any PALs. And yeah, that's pretty much it. When starting this run, I built a new world with an appropriate name for this challenge, spawned in, and immediately began grabbing wood and stone to build up a throwaway workbench. Once I had enough wood and stone, I threw down a PAL box, foundations, and a few chests to make sure everything was stored away. After collecting up more raw materials, I made some clothes, finished the roof, and then made a spear, bow, and some arrows. It's probably about now that I should mention one of the biggest hurdles in this challenge. Normally, when you're crafting items in Palworld, you lean on the vastly superior skill of your pals to do most of the crafting for you. On average, not only are they much faster, but using pals at your base to craft frees you up to do other things in the open world that ultimately saves you a ton of time. However, with no pals to count on, yeah, this run was going to take a while based on crafting alone. There is a way to counteract this tedium by leveling up work speed, but with no pals to lean on, I'm gonna need all the damage I can get. So no work speed bonuses for me. Fortunately for you, you're watching this on YouTube, and I'm smart enough not to have streamed this run. So while nobody will truly know the pain other than me, do keep in mind that every arrow, item, and structure you see was lovingly crafted by my own 2 hands. With that said, just a few short jump cuts later, and I've got a shield, glider, and bow, and I am all ready to go out exploring. My main goal early on is to rack up a bunch of kills, level up as quick as I can, and build a mass of resources that I'll need to get ready for the first faction leader. Now, instead of just charging in to fight the first faction boss and getting absolutely destroyed, I needed to try and upgrade my primary weapon by locating schematics for a rare bow. The quickest way to farm schematics at this level is dungeons. And the quickest and easiest one to get is actually right next to the tower for the first boss fight. So, diving into the darkness in search of those much needed upgrades, I'm surprised to find that the first syndicate thugs that appear are around my level and easy enough to deal with. But very quickly thereafter, it is made clear that this run is going to be a lot harder than I was expecting. I immediately went back at it again with a more cautious approach, and while I did have more success staying alive, I failed miserably at the I have enough arrows to shoot each enemy 46 times because they don't die. So, lesson learned. After farming more wood and stone, gathering resources from the surrounding pals, and adding a poison bow to my arsenal, I worked on replenishing some of that missing ammo. I then did one more massive farming push to make sure I had enough paldium, stone, and wood, and that process went long enough that I finally hit level 10, unlocking the feathered hairband and the 3-shot bow. With a ton of the tech tree basically of no use for this run, I also started getting a little experimental with how I was spending some of my tech points, and used just a little bit of wood to express my frustrations, we'll say. Even though the process of getting ready wasn't super enjoyable, I felt like I was finally ready to head back out to the starting dungeon and actually make it end to end for the first time. I ended up cheesing the dungeon boss pretty heavily, and instead of getting a decent schematic, the drops at the end of the dungeon were pretty awful. But I was still able to turn this loot into a nice boost of gold. Unfortunately, this is also when I realized that pretty much every outing into the world would come at the extremely time-consuming cost of replenishing all of my ammo on my own. I was enjoying the exploring and expanding, and the approach to inventory management had made the process interesting thus far. But to be honest, up to this point, the challenge run had not been that much fun. I was already feeling like it was an absolute grind, and I was growing antsy in the face of fighting the first faction leader at Rain Tower. So, against my better judgment, I thought it'd be worth doing a little face check just to see what I had in store for me. So I packed up all my good weapons, said my goodbyes to no one, and traveled to the first of 5 bosses I would need to fight to complete the challenge. With status effects ticking away, good dodging, and absolutely god-tier skill, I surprised myself in achieving a huge victory, and no, not at all. I had no shield pretty much the whole fight, and after realizing that I wasn't even dealing enough damage to finish the fight in time, I opted to avoid damaging my equipment and wasting ammo by just respawning back at base. I was already really doubting if this run was going to even be viable, and now I was starting to think that all the time I had already thrown into this challenge was going to end up wasted. While I was convinced I wanted to give it a try, I knew I wanted to get one more thing before going back. I was going to need a significant upgrade in damage, which meant it was time to make that long trek to Mount Obsidian. I avoided combat where I could, as I was in way over my head in this area, but all I needed to do was secure a fast travel point and I would... Damn it. That's right, no stamina.
You are dead!
Well, so much for being bold. I crafted up replacement equipment to go retrieve everything I lost, being an absolute idiot, brought the armor I should have had on me in the first place, and after a long stretch of dangerous travel, I finally secured a foothold on the island. With even the simple task of long distance travel proving to be a humbling challenge, I decided to ditch the strategy of being bold and settled on just being the best version of me. I also crafted up the schematic for the new cloth outfit I had found and made a new chest to store a full retrieval kit in the event of my untimely death, complete with a new motivational poster that would inspire me to perform at my best. I then sold more junk, did some quick PAL farming, and traveled back to Mount Obsidian to chase down what I knew would be the first real turning point in the run. You see, while you can sell your stuff to pretty much any vendor in the game, the merchant here at Fisherman's Point is special. With no PALs, metal weapons would remain forever out of my reach since you need a PAL with kindling to craft them. However, at the Fisherman's Point merchant, you can buy the makeshift pistol for the low price of... God damn! 16,600 gold? Well, I think you know what that means. Cue the montage. With the necessary gold finally collected, I traveled back to the fishing village, picked up the pistol, and went from 40 damage per arrow to a whopping 320 damage per shot. I bought what little ammo I could, strapped up with the best gear I had, and headed to Rain Tower for the rematch I'd been grinding towards. With my pistol ammo limited, I focused mostly on adding damage over time with poison and fire arrows, mixing in 3-shot bursts where I can. With the ammo I do have for the pistol, I take shots at range and try to use extra care to make sure I'm critting as often as possible. At the halfway point, it's clear that the damage buffs from leveling up and the higher output of the pistol have a chance to carry me across the finish line. But with 10k damage to go, I'm out of bullets. The burn and poison procs are getting harder and harder to apply, and I'm running low on ammo for both of my special arrows anyway. With time ticking down, I decide the only way for me to finish the fight out with the resources I have left is to engage Zoe in an up-close battle and aim for perfection to avoid the electric attacks. With time ticking down, I miss a crucial dodge and get forced into the open as the time, the boss's health, and my health are all rapidly pushing towards zero. Fortunately, with the win only a few seconds away, I clutch up on a back pedal, take aim, and deal the last burst of damage I need to put Zoe down for good. After hours of preparation, tons and tons of grinding, I had finally done it. Unfortunately, here's where the next big issue would emerge. Not only would these upgrades require metal ingots to craft, but I would also need metal ingots to repair the makeshift pistol that I'd already worked so hard to save up for. This would provide a rather challenging issue as I wasn't able to actually begin crafting the next tier of weapons at all. Even if I could, I would also need the high quality workbench to craft them, but... However, before I could even begin to worry about that, I went through the increasingly familiar process of farming up resources, replacing ammo, and running around the world a bit to scrounge up some more mats. I added some additional storage, built a fire to begin cooking food, and tried to minimize the soul-crushing nature of the grind by sprucing up my environment. I'd been procrastinating the next step of this run as I knew it was going to be a nightmare. But with my farming and replenishment behind me, I had no real excuse left to avoid it. While farming for wool and leather in Palworld is so easy you could probably do them on accident, it's worth pointing out that all PALs in the game only have 1 or 2 specific things that they're actually able to drop. While leather may be one of the most common, there are also PALs that drop cotton candy or copper keys, and yes, even fully processed metal ingots. While this meant that there was at least an opportunity to craft that next tier of weapons and armor I'd need, it also meant that the only way I would get it is by going through Bushy. While this was great in the sense that I had a pathway forward, it also came with some problems. Perhaps chief among them, Bushy is actually pretty rare. So rare, in fact, that he is one of only a few PALs that can be found in the Sanctuary Islands. In addition to being hard to locate, he's also a rather late game PAL, appearing at a level range of around 30 to 40. This means that even if I were to come across one at this point in the run, well, it wasn't gonna end well. Fortunately for me, there was at least one viable option. In addition to PALs you encounter in the wild, many PALs have an alpha form that is represented by a one-off dungeon or world boss that includes the fight with the specified PAL. The only problem here is that bosses are stronger, tougher, and take way more damage than their non-alpha counterparts.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
I spent the next several hours traveling and farming. I traveled and I farmed, I traveled and I farmed. I traveled and then I farmed some more. While I'd been making slow progress, the process of the grind was sort of getting to me. And I thought, what better way to break up the monotony than by taking some time to check off another item on my list of things I'd need to do before the end of the run. While not particularly dangerous by itself, one of the longer and more daunting challenges would be to activate the fast travel locations outside each boss tower. Since I'd already gained a foothold on Mount Obsidian, I thought what better way to take a break from farming than by trying to climb a goddamn volcano. So instead of farming and traveling, I climbed and climbed and climbed. Before long, I had eventually cut a path towards the center of the island and grabbed the fast travel point even closer to where I was heading. It's at this point in the run where I ran into another issue that I hadn't thought of in any depth until now. The tower fight against AXEL atop Mount Obsidian and the fight against Victor at the peak of the Astral Mountains were located at the absolute summit of their respective biomes. While this normally wouldn't have been an issue in a run where you could, fly, I had to reach both using climbing as my only means of traversal. And after a while, I quickly realized that these crags, and more specifically the gaps between the crags that allowed me to climb, weren't really built with that in mind. Man, I was feeling low. Having to spend literal hours just to farm resources to replace my ammo and equipment, it was beginning to take its toll. It was brutal and tedious. But I did eventually come across a pendant of diligence that would take some of the sting out of long crafting jobs, and these farming runs did level me up to unlock more stuff I, couldn't really craft. The grind was real, but I stuck to it, and it wasn't long before I activated the fast travel point I was after and found myself standing at the entrance to the fight I'd been looking for. I ventured inside with my hopes high and ready for anything. I tried to focus on using the interior pillars as cover, applying my damage over time, and no. What did you think was gonna happen? I was gonna go in there with a starter bow and level 10 armor and just one-shot him? You're a complete idiot. Don't worry, I wasn't even salty about it. Eventually, I leveled up enough to feel like there was some significant space between me and my last defeat, and I thought I might be ready for another attempt. So I put on my Sunday best, crossed my fingers, and approached the threshold of my last failure. Even with hours and hours of grinding, the fight was closer than I would have liked, and he even got me close to death on more than one occasion. Fortunately, I had farmed up enough ammo to treat this like a do-or-die fight, and with both of us close to tapping out, it finally happened. Phase 2 of the run had finally begun. Excited as I was, to craft the high-quality workbench, I'd need a lot more metal ingots. So I turned what I had into nails, sold off the drops from my success, updated my imaginary friends at base, and then traveled back to Bushy's hideout to repeat the process. Hello? Oh, I see how it is. Despite the rather obnoxious cooldown in the boss arena, I had renewed confidence in the run. So, to celebrate my big victory, I decided to... Oh, right. After all of that fun, it was finally time to pay Bushy another visit, and to my surprise, it actually went pretty well this time around. I went back to Bushy just to verify that the cooldown timer wasn't a one-off thing, only to discover, I would need to wait an hour, real time, in between each attempt I made just to collect a few metal ingots. So, with lots of time to kill, I somehow convinced myself it would be a good idea to increase my record to 0-2 against a mountain. Well, after that failure, I at least wanted to get my stuff back. So I quick threw on a spare kit and headed back to recoup my lost items. Fortunately, coming at the mountain from the north side had the benefit of no, it didn't. I finally came across my first attack pendant, and then it was more selling stuff, adding to my savings account, and farming until I had enough mats to build a 20-man clan base. Each time I farmed Bushy, it was costing me about 100 arrows, which always needed replacing. but after my 5th success over Bushy, I finally had enough ingots to craft my 10th nail. In addition to that exciting progress, the sales from the fight pushed me over the finish line to finally picking up the fire crossbow and some fire arrows I didn't even have to craft. So, with this new addition secured, I crafted an outfit to navigate into the snow ring, cooked up some food for the trip, left myself an opportunity to celebrate when I returned, and then gave myself one last pep talk before heading out. After a little exploring and dialing in on the right location, I finally arrived at the pylon in front of the looming tower. I quick traveled back to base to make use of that tier 3 old bow schematic, and then returned, going inside planning to use the pillars of the arena, and yeah, you know what? You already know what's coming. It wasn't super close. My shield and armor were basically thick construction paper, and even with the fire damage, there was clearly no way I was getting anywhere near enough damage within the 10 minutes available. Honestly, this is where I got stuck. Even if I could dodge everything perfectly, even if I could double my damage, that would still put me just out of range based on my initial attempt. I truly didn't know if there was a pathway forward, and there was nothing ahead of me but a bunch of wasted time. But I wasn't gonna put this much time into the run and not finish it, so as rough as this run had been so far, I had one big thing still going for me. I was finally closing in on the metal I would need to take that next big step. I teleported back to Bushy, threw damage at range, and nope. No! Okay. As I was saying, I teleported back to Bushy, threw damage at range, and yes, all right, there it is. Until I could face Bushy once more, I'd spend the entirety of the next hour extending my losing streak against Mount Obsidian to 0-3. Yay. Fortunately for me, what I lack in awareness for what constitutes a good use of my time, I make up for in sheer determination and stupidity. So, without a care in the world, I run back to Bushy's hideout, give him the old Robin Hood special, and finally secure those last ingots I need. I was so pumped. I was like a kid on Christmas running back to my base and immediately began playing with my new favorite toy. New armor? Mine. New shield? Gimme. It was time. I was ready. I had the free PAL Alliance tower in my sights, and nothing was gonna stop me. Nothing, of course, except for... Come on. You're this far into the video and you didn't see this one coming? That's on you at this point. Jokes aside, I had already been in this world for 75 days up to this moment. At 32 minutes per day in game, that equates to 40 hours, real time. And as I hadn't even beaten the second boss yet, this loss was an absolute morale killer. I didn't know if this run would be possible. I thought I'd wasted a ton of time and energy and all for nothing. But that did get me thinking. The question I posed at the beginning of the video is a simple one. Can you beat Palworld with no PALs? So I came up with an idea to give me an early preview of the answer. I opened up my game save where I had tons of resources, powerful items, and access to pretty much every corner of the map. If I was going to torture myself through the rest of this challenge, I thought it only made sense to do a quick little test to see what I was in for. I farmed up the legendary schematics that I'd have access to, and then went in to fight the final boss with the absolute best possible combination of items I would ever have access to without using PALs. The legendary metal helm, the tier 3 cold resist armor, which surprisingly provides more protection than the basic legendary armor, the legendary pistol, a 20% boost from a food recipe I technically couldn't craft, respecking my character to be 100% damage all the way up to level 50, a Duke Nukem game's worth of grenades, and a pair of pendants to provide the maximum possible damage output that my no PAL character could ever possibly reach. Oh. Well, that was probably just a fluke. I mean, what are the chances that it... Oh. Sure. Well, after enough time, I'm sure I could get good and avoid the damage and it wouldn't be an issue. So, if I just armor up in my legendary PAL armor, legendary helm, and hyper shield, at least I can see if I have enough damage, right? Oh. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that one this time. Okay. But what if I turn the enemy's damage down so low that it becomes a non-factor and allows me to focus exclusively on landing as many critical hits as possible? Well, over the course of this knockdown drag-out fight, I spent the entire time focused on clicking on SHADOWBEAK's head as much as possible. With everything I can do to crank up my damage, I'm averaging around 330 damage per crit. That means I only need to land 608 shots to get through his 200,000 plus hit points. Over the course of 10 minutes, that means I'd need to land a little more than 1 crit per second. assuming I spend no time dodging, running from the attacks, reloading, or repositioning to avoid damage, which, as a reminder, you'd have to do perfectly. And even then, you'd still more than likely run out of time. Even cheating a little extra damage in with food that can only be cooked at an electric kitchen, I still couldn't quite close in on the victory against the final boss with the best possible tools and given the opportunity to focus almost exclusively on damage. With the math not mathin', I had two options. Conclude that it couldn't be done and let the video end here, or make a small concession to answer the original question in a different way. Can you beat Palworld with no asterisk PALS? Now, before you rush to an obligatory run invalid comment, I'm talking no passive benefits, no extra combat damage, no help farming or navigating, still just me and what I can carry. Can I beat Palworld with that? After a lot of consideration and some consulting with the team that helps make these videos happen, I settled on a Jolthog and a Foxsparks. Their applicable work suitability is only a 1, and the only suitability they have is for the task they'll be assigned. So no help from either one crafting items or gathering resources. In addition to adding these pals to the mix, I also turned up the XP multiplier. This didn't really provide me any distinct advantages, but it did save me time. After modifying the parameters of my approach, I got started by going out and catching a Foxsparks near Rain Tower and a Jolthog near the Desolate Church. However, before diving into the advancement of my weapons and armor, I thought I would do well to make sure that the limited pals I was allowing for this run knew that they were deeply appreciated. Once I'd taken care of a few housekeeping needs, I got to work upgrading my glider, weapons, and armor, and swung back to the fishing village to pick up a little ammo for my newly crafted weapon. After adding a poison crossbow to finally fill in all 4 damage slots, I finally felt I was ready to visit the FPA tower to take my vengeance. The fight actually started off pretty easy, and I was dodging most of her attacks without an issue. As the fight wore on, I was dealing decent damage, but I could tell that it was going to come down to the very last... Oh, no, god damn it! So, farm sellable mats, buy more bullets, craft more bullets, farm up some metal ore. A lot of metal ore. I add a power generator to the base, and yeah, that took a while. Then I craft some nails, cement, and a production assembly line so I can finally craft some good weapons and armor. From there, I added a shield that I thought would prove to be all the difference. It didn't, so I'll make this as brief as possible. Farming, fiber, bullets, improved furnace, polymer, weapon assembly line, ingots, and rifle. With these upgrades, there is no way I can lose, right? Fortunately for you, this time I'm not trolling. The fight ended almost as easy as it started, and while my shield was still getting absolutely decimated in one hit, I kept my exposure to a minimum, dodged most of her attacks, and was able to coast to victory with a legitimately surprising amount of time to spare. I would still have a long way to go, and there would still be many frustrations ahead of me, but a light had appeared at the end of this very long and dark tunnel. With that victory, it was 2 bosses down and 3 to go. This was perhaps the first time in the run since I started where I felt like I had a real shot of seeing it through to the end. I knew capping out on damage and armor was going to be an important component in being able to complete this challenge, so instead of rushing into the next boss fight, I was back on the grind. Now, without showing you absolutely every painstaking moment, I'll just say that focusing on grinding out XP was a process, but I was eventually able to unlock the refined armor, and I had already begun the process of trying to farm up enough coal to craft it. In getting ready for the next step of my journey, I also crafted the grappling gun that helped me secure the waypoint outside the tower on Mount Obsidian, which I accidentally didn't get footage of. From there, I went through the similarly long and frustrating process of climbing to secure access to the PIDF tower in the desert for the fight against Marcus. I did a quick face check for both to see which one was a smarter next step, and spoilers, they were both extremely lethal. But with AXEL and ORZERK having 16,000 less health, that felt like the better place to start. So I put my good stuff back on, took my newly minted double barrel shotgun, and traveled back to Mount Obsidian to give AXEL a first try. At this point, you're probably not surprised to find that it didn't go my way. Maybe it's just because I expected to get completely washed, but this loss didn't sting as much as some of the fights before it. With the addition of a way to reliably get metal and farming including more combat than just chopping at trees for hours, I was able to move forward without the devastating frustration that had often followed even the smallest of defeats. I quickly got back to farming so I could make refined ingots, fought world bosses for sellable material, and dumped off what I could to replace my expended ammo. I also unlocked and crafted the refined metal armor to ensure that I'd have the highest tier of armor available for the uptick in difficulty. With the new level of protection secured, my ammo replenished, and only 3 more bosses to go, I decided to pay another visit to AXEL in the Obsidian Mountains. It was during this fight that I learned that ORZERK's lightning beam goes through pillars. So yeah, that's a thing. Well, I could have gone straight back to give it another go, armed with the knowledge that ORZERK's lightning beam is actually made of fucking nanoparticles. I decided to venture north to activate the fast travel pylon for the last boss fight. I wouldn't be ready to take on this boss for quite a while, but I knew it would be a required step at some point, so I figured I could do some exploring while I regrew. While I was running around though, I came across a chest, but unlike many of the hundreds of chests I'd probably already opened to this point, this one had a rather significant result. My recent level up also unlocked the pump action shotgun, which I immediately began crafting. Don't worry, it only took 42 minutes. It probably wasn't a good idea, but with my excitement in giving this new weapon a real test, I thought maybe it was worth giving AXEL another try, and yeah, sure, why not? So, I ran some dungeons, fought some bosses, and finally unlocked the electric furnace that would help me push into the final tier of weapons and armor in the game. I made a short trip to grab some quartz, made some circuit boards, and waited for my refined ingots to finish. After a lot of additional grinding and farming, I finally had enough mats to build the electric furnace and truly open up the endgame. With access to PAL metal, the blueprint I had found earlier, and the final tier of armor in the game was within reach. But I knew from early testing that PAL armor by itself wouldn't be nearly enough. To truly put AXEL and ORZERK behind me with ease, I'd need to focus on upgrading damage. So, with an increase to my DPS as the main focus, I naturally took my next level in work speed?
What?
Look, to make upgraded weapons and armor, I would need a lot of materials. Many of them I would have to craft myself. After hours and hours of crafting, I finally broke. Even if it would result in a little less damage at the end, I wouldn't make it to the end if I slipped slowly into a spiraling madness of insanity before I got there. Anyway, the next several hours of this game would include me taking my frustrations out on any boss I could get my hands on before eventually building the electric kitchen. While I hadn't upgraded my armor just yet, a 20% bump to my overall damage was enough to give me a sense of confidence that I could take ORZERK down. After applying both poison and fire damage, my shield is instantly destroyed. But after just 90 seconds, an accumulation of up-close shotgun blasts has eaten through a decent portion of his health. I then switch focus to trying to get additional procs of damage over time and follow up with close-range shotgun blasts that were landing huge amounts of damage. My dodges had been on point, and by the 6-minute mark, I still had my shield, all my health, and ORZERK was nearly at half. Unfortunately, it was at this point I realized that I likely wouldn't have enough shotgun ammo to finish the fight with the same pace. So I shifted focus to applying more damage over time and dealing direct damage with crossbows and my pistol. The added drawback of this is that they need more accuracy, which also leaves me more open to damage. With only 4 minutes left and with 50,000 hit points to go, I switch back to my shotgun for a bit to try and maintain the damage pace I need. As the 3-minute mark rolls around, tragedy. Misreading his attack, I get hit directly with a lightning beam that absolutely melts away most of my health. I retaliate with a big burst of fire, relocate to gain space, and begin firing my pistol when I get hit with a spray of dark fire that brings me to the absolute edge. I keep creating space and trying to pick away at him from range, and with 2 minutes to go, he still has about 25,000 health left. After narrowly dodging an acid rain and 2 powerful AoE attacks in a row, I open up with half of my remaining shotgun shells and end up with just 7 in total. Fortunately for me, I'd avoided damage long enough at this point that my shield recharged because it's gone. Immediately thereafter, I get hit with another up-close attack that brings me back down to being 1 hit from death. I avoid enough damage just long enough for my health to recharge, and I go from 137 to 210 when this happens. Brought within an inch of my life, I burn all but my last shotgun round and get a burn proc off. He's close, but so am I. And that's when I see my shield begin to recharge. If my shield can eat just 1 attack, I've got a chance to get up close and push him over the edge. And as he goes into a fire breath that would undoubtedly remove my shield and the last scrap of health that I have, I charge in, switch to my shotgun, and finally finish the fight with only 7 seconds to spare. It had been an incredibly difficult fight, and I'd only just eked out a victory, but I'd finally done it. That's 3 bosses down, 2 more to go. After I settled down from the high of my victory, I built the upgraded assembly line and began working on the final shield upgrade. Once I had a little bit of extra protection, I wanted to check how much PAL metal I'd need to actually craft the high-end blueprint that I'd found. Yeah, this definitely gonna take a while. So while I was patiently waiting for some PAL metal to refine, I continued to focus on boss runs, and on one of them, even got a slight upgrade to the PAL metal cold protection armor as well. But I still didn't have enough for that. So with a PAL metal ingot taking 2 eons and a millennia just to complete a single one, I thought I'd venture back to Mount Obsidian to secure something I'd need for the end of the run. You see, in all of these quick cuts and montages of me killing boss pals, you've likely noticed that there are a few that have been more present than others, with many of the alphas on the map never appearing at all. That's because Beacon, Bushy, and Blazemut all have something special in common. They all drop legendary schematics for weapons. After getting lucky with Blazemut, I ended up getting the legendary schematics to drop after only a half dozen or so attempts. It was probably closer to 20 in total, but I eventually cheesed out enough victories where the game took pity on me, and it wouldn't be long before Beacon would drop the legendary pistol schematic as well. With the time it took to get these blueprints to drop, I finally had enough PAL metal to actually begin crafting the tier 3 heat protection armor that I'd collected many hours previous. And let me just say, crafting this armor took a while. In fact, I would end up crafting this armor so long that the assembly line and furnace running at the same time would deplete the base of power completely. Even though the process was long, I eventually ended up with a massively powerful set of armor that nearly doubled my protection immediately. The next thing I needed to do was craft a legendary assault rifle, and you can just assume that you missed one hell of a farming montage, because in addition to needing a ton of coal and ore, my base was beginning to feel a little bit less than functional. I'd always planned to relocate to a more spacious and flexible ground at some point, I just hadn't. So instead of this, you can have a little bit of this. Look, that's a wall. The move over to a new location came with some significant organization and layout improvements, and I even made some additional upgrades for my little helpers as part of the move. With the resources I needed procured and my base relocated, I set out to tackle the one remaining hurdle that had thus far eluded me: accessing the fast travel point outside the last boss tower. Now, I had thought that climbing to the top of Mount Obsidian was hard, but wow, I was wrong. Even seeing the tower at a distance after a long climb would prove to be a frozen mirage in the chilled oasis, as my efforts to scale the mountain itself resulted in fall after fall after fall. And even one time where I got very, very close before getting stuck under the map and being forced to respawn. It was a grind and included upgrading some of my tools and equipment, but after hours and hours of climbing, close calls, and dedicated patience, I did finally get there. I'm not joking when I say that this maybe was one of the most difficult portions of the run. But now that I had this foothold secured, I set my sights on paying Marcus another visit. But before I rushed headlong into a fight that had previously proven almost entirely unbeatable, I wanted to upgrade my primary weapon first. And now feels like a good time to explain how crafting works in Palworld. You see, up to this point, the challenge had been a grind. That's definitely true. Farming resources, fighting enemies, and the simple task of scaling mountains had all been huge time sinks that absolutely sapped my spirit. But nothing could prepare me for the absolute mind-numbing tedium of crafting. If you're not aware, the time it takes to craft items in Palworld is based on the workload listed for a given item. One workload means it takes you 1 second to craft at the default work speed. So the primitive workbench at the start of the game with a workload of 5, you guessed it, from ready to non-existent in 5 seconds. Since I had been focused almost entirely on adding to my damage, well, even some of the basic crafting materials in the later stages of the game become important decisions based on the time investment alone. But the legendary assault rifle, well, it has a workload of 32,000. That means even with the food and equipment bonuses I could muster, crafting this one was going to take me 166 minutes to craft, real time. So if you're still watching at this point in the video, it feels like the best time to remind you to like and subscribe. You've watched it long enough already. I'm gonna make other good shit, I promise. Now, with the single longest soul drain of the run out of the way, I returned to the PIDF tower armed to the teeth with a pair of legendary weapons, upgraded armor, a pair of damage pendants, and a 20% food boost from Ike Loco. While I'd love to try and add drama and make this fight seem like some tooth and nail scrap to the finish, it just wasn't. If anything, I think I played kinda scuffed. I got hit by a lot of attacks I probably shouldn't have, but at this point in the run, I'd maxed out my shield, I was wearing almost the highest tier of armor available for the region, and I had a fully automatic stream of ammo dealing nearly triple the damage I was used to. It was definitely a little sketch, and there were at least a couple times in the fight where I was at least a little nervous, but for the first time, my equipment was properly leveled. I played with the edges and corners enough to avoid most of the big damage, and quicker than any boss fight before it, it was done. With Marcus out of the way, that was 4 bosses down, and just 1 to go. With only 1 fight left, I wanted to make sure that I had taken the lessons from the rest of the challenge run and not immediately charge headlong into a fight I thought I was going to lose. Beyond the difficulty I knew I'd be facing, going into the fight and failing meant a huge hit in time, as I'd likely have to spend hours farming, fighting, and making trips to merchants just to get everything back to tip-top shape. The stakes were as high as they were going to get from me. While I was in the process of killing time while the PAL medal was finishing back at base, I ended up running a dungeon in the mountains that yielded a rather significant result. Not only did I find an upgrade to my helm, but I also found a tier 3 defense pendant, which would go a long way to addressing one of my biggest weaknesses in the fight. I cooked up some XDeej loco to boost my damage, crafted up my new helm to top out my protection, and opted to use my tier 3 heat protection armor with the cold protection underwear for thermals, since it was still a massive step up in my overall protection. Feeling as ready as I was gonna get, I stepped into the boss fight with all my eggs in the basket. As soon as the fight opened up, I immediately started dumping full mags into tight groups of critical hits. Quickly after that, I dealt with the full force of why this was going to be a difficult fight without the added benefit of a PAL companion drawing some aggro. In order to deal enough damage, I had to choose my moments extremely carefully, as standing still for too long in any one place could easily result in a death spiral of damage that I just wouldn't have the stamina or health to fight through. The early portions of the fight saw me picking away in what pockets I could find, but I was already taking a lot of damage from SHADOWBEAK's beam attacks and getting caught in an ice eruption that removed my shield early on. Adjusting as best I could, I focused on maintaining distance, drilling crits as quickly as possible, and dodging the big bursts of AoE damage. After getting him down to half health, I knew I had enough damage and ammo to finish the fight, as long as I didn't make any big mistakes. And that's when I realized I didn't actually eat my XDeej loco, so. Anyway, though my shield continued to dance on the edge of being completely gone, the distance I was able to keep provided big windows to pour ammo, and slowly but surely I was gaining an edge in the fight. And that was it. There wasn't any down-to-the-wire tension. There wasn't a battle of attrition while I hobbled on my last legs across the finish line. It was simply a methodical and concentrated demonstration of preparation, dedication, and fortitude. With one last burst on target, I'd finally done it. When it was over, I nearly cried, I was so excited. After 95 hours of farming, fighting, and struggle, it came down to just 5 minutes of combat, 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and a wealth of experience and skill I had developed along the way. Did I do it without PALs? No. Technically not. Did I beat all 5 faction bosses on my own using only weapons and armor? Definitely yes. Whether you want to count that or not is up to you. You can leave your support or disdain down in the comments. Whatever your perspective, there is no debating it. That was 5 bosses down and 0 to go. Thank you for watching. Until I see you next time. Party on.